Good morning, everyone, to this webinar on how Impero simplifies Provision 29 compliance, demonstrating control effectiveness in practice. Really wonderful to see so many of you already signing on. We are going to give it just a minute or two. We know a lot of people are running from their morning meetings, and I can see some people still joining us. So a warm welcome to all of you, and we're just going to give it another minute or so before we officially get started. And for those of you just joining, good morning. Welcome to this Provision 29 compliance webinar with Impero. We're going to be getting started in just a minute or so. Just want to make sure we give enough time for people to join after their morning meetings. Really wonderful to see so many people signing on as well. So just going to give it another 30 seconds or so before we officially kick it off. Let people join from their morning meetings. Just another 15 seconds or so. Good morning if you're just joining us. We just want to give a couple seconds to let people join after their morning meeting rush. But wonderful to see so many of you already joining us live here this morning. We really appreciate it. All right, I think we have a good sense of who's joined so far. I'm sure there will be more people ticking in, but let us kick it off. Welcome to this Impero webinar on how Impero simplifies Provision 29 compliance, demonstrating control effectiveness in practice. What we're covered today, I just want to go through that. We're just going to do a quick welcome and some practical information. Then we're going to have a look at what Provision 29 requires and how it's changing the UK Corporate Governance Code expectations. And we're going to take a look at that with Jacob. And then we're going to have a look with my colleague William on how to structure your internal control framework according to these new expectations, and look at some practical steps for documenting and looking and collecting evidence and what that looks like in a real Provision 29 setup. And so we're going to take a look at that in practice in the Impero risk and control platform. We'll also follow up with some Q&A. We have about 45 minutes today, so we'll see how much Q&A allows. And if not, we always welcome you to send in any of your questions afterwards to us at marketing@impero.com. A few good things to know before we kick off and go into the webinar is that we are always recording our webinars. So if there is something you miss or something that you want to share with your colleagues, don't worry. We will share it afterwards via email. We'll also post it on our website and on our YouTube channel in case you want to rewatch or share with others. So it will be available on demand wherever you need. And feel free to use the Q&A in the questions panel. So if you're in Zoom, there's a Q&A panel. So throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in there. But please do note that we're going to address all of the questions at the end. There's also a chat function, so if you should need any assistance during the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll do my best to kind of try to accommodate that. Now, a quick introduction to us. I'm Jasmine Hansen de Guzman. I am the marketing director here at Impero, and I'm simply going to be the moderator here today. I will hand it over to my two quick colleagues to quickly introduce themselves. William, would you like to go first?
Sure, thanks, Jasmine. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is William Christensen. I'm on the implementations team here at Impero. Coming from a background in IT audit originally and some financial services regulatory compliance, but more recently I've been helping Impero customers get set up in our system, looking at adapting their own specific workflows and use cases to our platform. So really looking forward to talk specifically about Provision 29 with all of you today.
Wonderful. And Jacob?
Hello, I'm Jacob. I'm a founder of Impero. Also a little bit about my background, also a financial auditor, worked for big four companies for many years and then started up Impero, a little bit more than 10 years ago.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for those quick introductions. And before we dive into all of the content around Provision 29, we did just also want to highlight a little bit about who we are as a company, if you're not familiar with us, and how we've been exploring Provision 29. So we're Impero Compliance Simplified. We are a risk and internal control platform, really strong on the internal control side, which is why we're really taking a look at Provision 29, because we've been talking with a lot of customers and a lot of prospects, and it is just an incredibly good fit that if you do need to prove control effectiveness, to have a system like ours, which William's going to show you in a little bit, that makes sure that you're audit ready and you have all the evidence collected. We've been exploring the UK quite a bit the past year. And in fact, last week, Jacob and I were over at Risk Europe at the Excel Center in London, where we had a ton of great conversations with plenty of companies in the UK that not necessarily need to comply with Provision 29, because that is mainly right now mandated for publicly listed companies, but there is a spillover effect. So as with any other regulation, it is something that we're seeing more and more companies looking to do, because they're looking to do the right thing, and they do know that their boards and their executive management do need to be able to prove the effectiveness of their risk and internal control frameworks. Jacob, anything else to add from our conversations last week at Risk?
No, I think just really, really interesting to talk to many companies who are, in the preparational phase right now. Some already did something, and others they are, let's say, just really just starting right now. So, no, really fruitful to be there.
It's a really good point. I think I talked to a handful of companies, or more even, who are still in an Excel spreadsheet phase for a lot of their prep work for Provision 29, which we just know when it does come to audit season just doesn't necessarily fly. So there's a lot of great technology tools, including Impero out there, that can help. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. But before we jump into that, we do just want to do a quick little poll. So we do like to be quite interactive on our webinars. And we did want to ask you about how far along you are with your Provision 29 compliance today, or your preparation. So are you just getting started? Are you in progress but in early stages? You have a plan and you're already executing on it, or you already feel ready for next year? Could also be that it's not applicable to you yet because you're not UK listed. But as I said, there is always a spillover effect with these kinds of regulations, and we do always encourage you to do the right thing. All right, I can see so far about 45% are just getting started, 9% in progress but early stages. About 17% of you have a plan and are executing on it. Props to you. We don't have anyone else who feels ready yet, and then we have a couple who it's not applicable to yet. So let me just end the poll. I'll quickly share the results with all of you in case you're curious to see where people are at. A good spread, but no one really feels quite ready yet for next year. So that's exactly why we're here today, to talk a little bit more about how to get ready. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Jacob.
Yep. Thanks, Jasmine. And yet again, hello to everyone. It's really great to see so many joining in today. And as you said, Jasmine, Provision 29 has really become let's say, a key topic in the UK. Not just something relevant for the boards, but really something that is relevant for everyone working with risks and internal controls. And I think Provision 29 asks for something that sounds quite simple. A clear annual statement that your internal control framework is effective and well monitored. It's quite a big change. It means moving away from just, let's say, designing controls to actually being able to demonstrate that controls has been working in practice over a given period of time. So I'd say for you, it means having a structured control framework that connects risks, controls, control owners, and reporting. And then, of course, it also means, and quite crucial, means creating transparency towards and comfort towards boards and stakeholders. And that is actually why we're here today, to make Provision 29 practical. We want to show you what it looks like in real life, how you can structure your framework, and how you can demonstrate effectiveness in a clear way. And I think on this, I will hand over to William, who has just prepared a few intro slides around provision 29, and then afterwards we'll walk through Impero step by step just to show how you can work with provision 29 in a platform like Impero.
Awesome. Thanks, Jacob. And before we pass off to William, I do just have one more quick poll, and that is looking at what is your biggest challenge within preparation or internal control effectiveness. So is it a lack of visibility across controls, manual processes and inconsistent documentation, limited resources or expertise, difficulty producing audit-ready evidence? I know people hate when someone asks for something and you got to go through a million SharePoint folders to find it, or you're just unsure where to start. So we just launched that. So far, I can see manual processes and inconsistent documentations leading the way, but I can see that is very quickly being spread out across many different topics. So I'm just gonna leave that open for, wow, lots of votes coming in. Great. All right, I'm just going to share those results real quick before I hand over to William. So it seems like most of you are struggling with manual processes and inconsistent documentation, but also limited resources or expertise. A little bit more of a split on difficulty producing audit-ready evidence, lack of visibility across controls, and unsure where to start. All right, William, over to you.
Thank you, Jasmine. And again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm sure most of you have at least some kind of background in provision 29 just by virtue of being here today. But to kind of give a little more context on that, we're looking at this from a revision of the 2024 UK Corporate Governance Code that's published by the Financial Reporting Council. And it is introducing these new requirements about managing and measuring the effectiveness of your internal controls. From a practical standpoint, this means we're looking at our risk and control framework should cover material risk and controls across a few key domains within finance, operations, compliance, and reporting. This idea of materiality is not something that's explicitly defined within the revision or in provision 29, and that's by design because it's putting some of the responsibility for coming up with materiality measures back on the boards and the organizations themselves. That said, there are some guidelines for what you can use to consider materiality, and this goes beyond financial thresholds that you may be using already, looking at other measures and metrics that you can use to quantify your risks, but also whether or not the risks have an impact on your organizational objectives and your ability to achieve those objectives. As well as looking at risk in terms of not just the downside risk, but missed opportunities as well, because this lack of a positive outcome is also something you need to consider when building your overall risk framework. From a practical, sorry if I could get a little more, the risks themselves should be managed by mitigating controls, and practically speaking, the feedback we've seen so far is that this means anywhere between 21 to 40 material controls, but there could be a lot more, up to 60 or more, depending on the complexity of your organization, or if you're in a highly regulated field like finance or something similar. It also depends a bit on your strategic approach to how you're building up your control framework. So are you taking a grouping approach, kind of similar to the risk bow tie, where you have a lot of initial risks feeding into one central event and some various outcomes onto that? So you could end up with many risks or many controls all making up one singular material item. Overall, your framework should include an assessed risk register mapped to mitigating controls, an evaluation of control design and performance, which is the important piece of provision 29, deficiency management and action tracking, and finally, the monitoring, review, and board level reporting to support the annual assurance statement. I think we have another poll now.
We do. So like you said, the important is the assessment. So what we did want to hear as well is what type of evidence is the most difficult for you to collect as of right now. So I'm going to launch this poll right now. And is it your control performance evidence, management reviews, risk assessments, exception reports, or the audit trail and logs. Because all of these are, of course, an important part of ensuring that you have a great risk register, but as well a corresponding internal control framework. Gonna leave that open for a couple more seconds, but I can see control performance evidence so far seems to be what most people are challenged with, then risk assessments, and then exception reports. So a good mix. All right, I'll close that one out. Quickly share the results. So as you can see, most people, 58% control performance evidence, then the risk assessments, and then exception reports. But great to see people are not having any challenges, at least on this call, with management reviews and audit trail logs. All right, William, I'll hand it back to you.
So from a high level standpoint, how can Impero help with provision 29? So the benefits of adopting a system like ours, looking at centralization, you have your entire risk and control framework within a single platform, which gives you the single source of truth in terms of ownership, status, and performance of your risks and controls. This also goes into reporting in that we have transparency and traceability built directly into the platform. Everything you do is tracked and logged, so you have a full and clear audit trail that can support these assurance statements that you need to be making. And finally, in terms of automation and flexibility, Impero is very much a blank slate when you get it, which gives us the flexibility to adapt to a wide range of workflows, use cases, and organizations. And the automation side of it allows you to set things up once and then let it run. So you don't have this recurring work tasks that you have to do over and over. We can optimize those processes on your side. The next slide. Those are all very high level. So what does that mean in practice? We're really making use of the entire platform to cover the provision 29 umbrella. So within our risk management module, using this to identify and assess our material risks and then map them to mitigating controls. Within our control and our control testing module, we're actually performing the controls and our effectiveness evaluations, both in the form of self-assessments and regular control testing, and also managing our ad hoc remediation actions here as well. And finally, on the reporting side, we can have our generic status reports that are tracking completion rates across all of our controls, but also dive a little deeper into some of these responses via our task-based reporting. We'll also pull our risk assessment results out of the risk module as well. I think that's it for the slides. So now we can get to the real practicalities of it. I will share my screen.
There you go, William.
Thanks. Here we are. Is that coming through okay?
It is
Perfect.
just about to come through. There we go. All good.
Great. So this is Impero for those of you who haven't seen it before. And whenever I show off the platform, I generally start by saying for your end users, your control performers, they won't actually be seeing this screen. This is giving you an admin overview of your control performance, but for those control owners who just need to perform their tasks, they'll receive an email notification with a link. They follow the link to perform their activities, submit, and they're done. That's a lot of what goes into the design of the platform as a whole, in that we want to streamline the process and make it as simple and hassle-free as possible. In terms of provision 29, I'll start over in our risk management module here. And we're organizing this based on risk directories that I've broken up between our entity level principal risks and business process, IT general, covering those different buckets that we see within provision 29 that need to be covered. From the entity side, I mentioned that Impero is very flexible in how we can adapt. So a lot of things in the platform are self-defined. In this case, I have a few different entities we've created by different business units, but this could be departments, legal entities, different users and teams, depending on the scale of your organization. Within the directories, we can get an assessment status both at a high level and per entity. And when I open up the directory itself, here I can see the different processes being contained within the directory, and underneath it, the individual risks themselves and which entities they're assigned to. If I take this FTPF risk, for example, when I'm creating a risk in Impero, I can give it a name, description, decide on the scope of the risk. And then we have some different risk values that we can add into it as well. And we like to highlight that this is very customizable within our system. Specific for Provision 29, I've added a materiality check here, but we can do a lot of different calculations, values, checks on risks, depending on what you have set up in your framework. Once you've created a risk and assigned it to an entity, you have access to the risk map here. And this is a visualization of your existing risk environment. So we're showing you an inherent view of all of your risks ratings based on this impact likelihood scale. But you can switch to the residual view as well to see what it looks like after you've applied your mitigating action. And we have the ability as well to take a historical snapshot so you can compare how your risk has changed over time. When it comes to the actual risk assessment part, you'll see that in the data table down here. Each row is defining a risk related to a certain entity that it is assigned to. If I take the same risk here, I'll see all of the information I had when I initially created the risk. And now I can go through the process of actually assessing the risk. So giving it an inherent impact and likelihood, and then choosing how I want to respond to this particular risk. If I want to reduce the risk, I'll have the opportunity to do a follow-up residual assessment and also apply some mitigating action. And this is where we're tying back to Impero's control module. I can select add control and search for all of the controls I have in my environment. And if I am applying this code of conduct mitigating control to this particular risk, I'll see all information about the control and select how much of the risk this is actually covering. From here, I can complete the assessment and get an overall view of the assessment status here, as well as do some exporting of the risks. We have API connections to something like Power BI if you're using that as well to do more advanced data modeling. Typically, what we see when it comes to performing this assessment is that we'll have a separate control program set up to send out reminders to our risk owners when it's time to do your annual or whatever frequency you're performing your risk assessment at, or you can give them a link to the particular risk directory. They'll follow it and see the controls that they themselves have access to and can perform the assessments from there. Going over to the control side of Impero now, when you first log in, you'll get this overview of your current control performance snapshot. And this is just a quick view in our reporting module that I'll get to in a bit. You'll have a more advanced view of how your controls are actually performing. A lot like risk, we organize controls within separate programs or folders that we call control programs. And within each of these, we have the controls themselves that we'll be sending out. So if I look at my entity level program here, I can open up this code of conduct policy or code of conduct control that I applied to my risk as a mitigating action. And here I can start building the controls that'll be sent out. And really with Impero, you can think of controls sort of as a template where you assign the details, description, set scheduling, and various tasks that need to be performed. And then on this assignment table, you're actually determining how many instances of the control will be sent out. So for example, I have 3 assignments on this single control. Each one is tagged with a separate business unit and country. And this is all self-defined, again, speaking to the flexibility of Impero, where we can define different business units, teams, departments. Any information you need to capture on the control, we can do it at the assignment level here as a tag, or at the control level to add more general information about the type of control it is, whether or not it's a key or material control, and so on. Each of these assignments will generate a separate control with this information tagged to it, but it'll all be based on the information you set up here. So you set up a control one time, and then you can leave it run, and it'll go out for all of those entities. In terms of scheduling, we can send out manual single controls that we'll use primarily for our mitigating and remediation actions in the Provision 29 context. But in most cases, you'll have them going out on a recurring basis. So for a monthly interval covering a certain period, you can set a due date as well as a custom calendar if you are only performing the control at certain times. And here you can set the planning of the control as well. So how many days each user would have to perform it. And you can see as I update these numbers, you'll get an overview here so you know exactly when the control will be sent and when it is due for each user. Reminders are fully automated before or after the due date of the control. And the final section here is where we're actually building the tasks of the control. So you can see here for my responsible first user, I'm asking them a confirmation whether the control activity has been performed. And we can do some basic conditional logic as well. So if yes, we'll ask for some supporting documentation and additional comments. If not, we'll want an explanation for why it wasn't done. It works for the same for reviewers as well, in that this is a no-code interface. You can drag and drop different question types, file uploads, and so on directly into this interface, and the task will be displayed from the top down for your control performers. What this actually looks like is something like this. Typically, as I mentioned, your control performers will receive an email notification with a link to perform the control, and they'll be brought to a page like this, where they see all of the background information about the control, what period it's covering, where it is in the workflow, and any tags you've assigned to it. And then they can go through and perform their actual tasks. So yes, I perform this control activity, upload my files, add my comments, and I'm done. For your reviewers, they'll receive a notification when a control is ready to review. They can either follow it on the link or access it via the dashboard here. And when they open the activity, they'll see all of the submissions that were made by the first user. They can review these and then perform their own tasks here. For this, we're just asking for a basic checklist of confirming that the control was done, file attachments, comments. Now here we're getting a little more specific to Provision 29 in terms of doing a control effectiveness self-assessment. This is sort of a lower level effectiveness rating that we can do control by control and use to build a report a bit later on. So here, if I rate that the control is effective, that's great. I probably don't need remediation action on this control to improve it. But if it's partially effective or not effective, you'll see I've conditionally made a remediation question appear. If there is remediation that's required on this control, we have some additional instructions on how to create a follow-up remediation task. And this is a specific workflow we've set up in this environment to cater for the exceptions and remediations in Provision 29. When I follow the link on the control, I'm brought to a copy of a template that's set up in a separate remediation program. I'll update this template control based on information within the control where the remediation is coming from. I can add a new description, tag it with the relevant entities that were included on the original control. So this is for business unit 100 in the UK. I can add my responsible users just like I would set up a normal control. And then in turn for remediation, I would send it out as a manual control because I'm only performing it once, and send immediately. So as soon as I save, it'll go out to those users to start working on the corrective action. All of this from the control side can be tracked in the reporting here. Our default report in Impero is this status report here, where you can see how the controls are being performed over time. So how many were on time, how many were late, how many you might still have pending or overdue. And we can set up these reports in a lot of different ways based on the tags we apply to the assignments. So here I'm looking at my business unit tag, so I get a breakdown of those different business units who are performing the same controls. But I could look at different programs for a general overview, or even individual users. On this data table down here, you can dive a little deeper into the individual control activities by layering the program to control to business units. And if you want, for example, to get an overview of any currently pending controls or overdue controls, you can get an activity view here, where then as an admin in Impero, I can use to send reminders, reassign the controls, or archive them if they're no longer needed. A more advanced report that's particularly relevant for provision 29 is where we're mapping the responses to that effectiveness self-assessment question we included on the controls to its own report. So this report is building the data columns based on those responses, whether or not the reviewer rated the control activity as effective, not effective, partially effective, and we're also tracking whether or not a remediation task was required as part of the activity. With the control filtering, or with the filtering on the report, if I want to see all of my not effective controls, I can confirm also whether or not we have a corresponding remediation action to them. So one way you can track your control effectiveness in addition to the remediations that are being performed. These you would then view in a separate report based on their individual status, so you can see when they're being completed over time. That's in terms of a self-assessment. Our more formal way of assessing the effectiveness of our controls is going to be done in our control testing module. And this is a fairly new module for us. It's a way of gathering samples of your controls and then making some evaluations and questions based on both the activities themselves and then on the control as a whole. Control tests, like controls themselves, are organized in different programs here, where you'll set the name of the testing program, what it's covering, you can manage access, and then build the tasks like you would on a control itself. Testing tasks are done at the sample level. So again, these are the individual activities that you're pulling out. So here we're just asking if the controls were actually performed, additional comments and file attachments as necessary. And then we also make a conclusion at the control level here. So we might need to know if there were any remediation tasks that were created during this period for these particular controls and entities. And we have a mandatory effectiveness question here. So this will be your formal whether or not the control was effective based on the overall performance. When it comes to actually creating control tests, you can do that here by first selecting an entity you want to test. And this is based on the tags we've applied to the control assignments. So I have my different business units here. If I want to test for all of my entities, I can select all of them. This is a Q3 testing program. So I want to look within Q3 of this year. And based on this information, I'll be able to see which controls have activities for these entities within this time frame I've set. If I want to test everything, I can select them all. Otherwise, I'll just select a few. And here I'll see how many tests are being created for each control. 3 tests for 3 entities. A little further down, I can assign who will actually be performing the test, and we can have reviewers just like we would on controls. And we set a due date as well, following the same scheduling and working days to actually perform the testing. When I click create, my tests will be showing in the testing program here. And the testing users who are responsible for actually doing the performance will again receive an email with a link to perform the tests, or they can access them from their pending tests up here. And actually performing a test, the first step is actually bringing in the sample control activities from that particular period and entity. So here I'm looking at business unit 100 within this time period. When I add my samples, I can see there were 2 activities completed here. I can select the ones I want to test and bring them into my test here. To start performing the sample tasks, I click on each one and I can do my confirmations, add comments. But the important thing is that we actually look at what we're testing. So when we follow this link to the control activity itself, we can see everything that was originally uploaded. And you'll also notice that this icon here changes. So you see exactly when your testers actually viewed the activity, and you don't have a situation where control tests are being submitted without controls actually being reviewed as part of the test. Those are my sample conclusions. When I've completed that part, I can go on to actually do my effectiveness rating. I might say there were no remediations for this period, and I can do an overall effectiveness rating based on these samples I've pulled out here. In this case, I think the controls are good, it's effective, I can submit my test, and I'm done. From a reporting standpoint, you can access the completed test here in the Activities tab, where we have different columns we can bring in terms of your information collected on the test, and as well as this effectiveness column here, which will give you an overview of whether or not the controls were rated effective or not within this testing period. That's a lot of information to cover for a very short webinar. So thank you very much for following along. And I would encourage you to reach out to us too if you'd like more personalized walkthrough of Impero specific to your use case. I think the main point we're trying to drive home here today, though, is you see a lot of the discussion around provision 29 right now and how it's such a game-changing requirement and how disruptive it'll be for a lot of organizations. But in reality, it's not that complicated, or at least it doesn't have to be. Whether you use Impero or another solution, we see a lot of organizations already have some very solid practices in place. And what we're offering on is a way to streamline and make this process easier on both yourselves as administrative users, but on your end users and control performers as well. And I think, Jasmine, I can hand it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, William, for that walkthrough. And like you said, a lot of good information in a short amount of time, but do let us know. And I'm just going to share my screen here. And I will also launch a poll, because if you would like a personalized walkthrough of what it could mean for your organization, please just let us know and we'll reach out to you. I'm going to leave that open as we go through the next couple of slides here as well. But like you said, I think the really, really strong part about our platform is that it is a blank slate. So depending on your risk appetite, how you want to work with Provision 29, there's a lot of different ways that you can work with it. And William, of course, is our in-house expert who can really help with that. I'll leave that open as well. Before we jump into Q&A, I did want to share a couple of our resources as well. So if you're just curious to learn more about the platform, do check out our help center. We have a lot of information there. We do have a Provision 29 readiness checklist as well. We'll make sure to put that in the follow-up email. So if it is something sometimes that requires internal education within your organization, that is a great piece to kind of help educate. And then, of course, follow us on LinkedIn for more on Provision 29. It is a big topic for us right now. We've also got the QR codes for our newsletters. And in case you're curious to see more about the developments of our product, we do host a quarterly product update webinar. So you're also welcome to save the date for that on the 11th of December and join us. With that, I think I'm going to open up for Q&A. And we've gotten a couple of questions here as well. But please feel free to chat in any questions you may have as well. And the first one that I have here, William, is how often should control effectiveness be tested?
From that standpoint, it should be at least annually. That's sort of the baseline. We see a lot of organizations sometimes doing more testing, and in reality, I think we're moving towards more of a continuous testing approach, which might be facilitated by a lot of emerging technologies, but annually at least is the bare minimum.
Of course, that makes sense. We also have someone who already has their risk register created, and they were wondering, can risks be tagged because it would make their scoping easier?
On the risk side, it doesn't work quite the same as
Mhm.
our control module in that we don't have a predefined area where you can create tags for risks. That said, the customization I mentioned on the risk side is very strong for us. So if you need specific information that you want to record on your risk, different values, checklists, checkboxes, and so on, we're very open to doing that. So please reach out to your CSM or us on the implementation team, and we can help out with getting that set up for you.
Yes, exactly. Just like you mentioned before, when you were going through, you could set up the material controls, non-material controls as a choice in the risk register.
Yeah, exactly.
How does Impero handle sign-off and management oversight, which are both important for Provision 29?
So built into the system, we have, of course, our reviewer workflows. So you can have up to 2 reviewers on a given control, and those would be the sign off in the sense of control performance. We could extend that through our control triggering function, which allows you now to chain controls together if you have a longer workflow. I think the important thing is really on the reporting aspect, though. So yes, you can have your sign off as the reviewer, but you also want to make sure that the big picture data is going out to the people that need it. That you can do through push reports that you can set up in the reporting module, or with another new feature that we have, notifying outside users of control completion. So when a control activity is completed, you can also notify users who aren't necessarily involved in that control workflow as well.
And I think that goes really hand in hand with this next question, William, which is Provision 29 requires the board to sign off and produce a report. How can Impero help with that?
I think we have a lot of good reporting features, especially in terms of the task-based reporting that I showed. You can get that overview of your effectiveness from the self-assessment standpoint. And from there, if you want to go more in depth, we have API connections to outside data modeling systems like Power BI. If you want to do more advanced visualizations and so on with your data, something that you could take and copy directly into an annual report or something like that.
Awesome. We have one more question here, but if you have any, feel free to chat them in. And it's, what's the best way to demonstrate that controls have been operating consistently throughout the year?
For that, I think the main thing is to look at completion status. So how many were submitted overdue? How many haven't been done yet? There are a few effectiveness considerations that have come across in a lot of the focus discussions around Provision 29, and this is looking at error rates within the control. So how many times has it gone through the reviewer workflow to be reperformed? Again, timeliness, as I mentioned, making sure it's completed on time. And then going a little more in depth of the design and the overall consistency of all of your controls. So does it make sense, the questions we're asking, and are we achieving the control objective that we set out to achieve? I think the biggest piece of advice there would be to make sure your control objectives are clear and straightforward, and that you can say that what we're making people do is working towards meeting those objectives.
Awesome. Well, I think that is we're just at about time and we don't have any more questions. So I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining the webinar. For those who requested follow-up, please do keep a lookout for an email from all of us. And you will get an email later this week with the recording and all of the resources that I mentioned. And I just want to say a really big thank you to you, Jacob, for your background information, and to you, William, for this very detailed walkthrough of how Impero can be used for Provision 29 compliance. Wishing you all a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.